There is a moment in television history that stops you cold. A 13-year-old girl walks onto the America's Got Talent stage looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously across a crowd of thousands, she introduces herself in a soft Northern English accent. The audience is politely curious. The judges lean forward, waiting. And then she opens her mouth. What comes out doesn't belong to a teenager. It doesn't belong to someone who still has homework due Monday morning. It belongs to a smoky jazz club, to a stadium at full roar, to the kind of voice that makes you put down whatever you're doing and just listen. Simon Cowell, a man who has sat across from thousands of performers and worn his boredom like a badge of honor, went rigid in his chair. His poker face, the one he spent decades perfecting, cracked wide open. He leaned back like the sound had physically moved him. And in that moment, the whole world fell in love with Courtney Hadwin. But what happened next is a story the headlines never quite told honestly, because the spotlight that made Courtney famous also cast a very long shadow. And today, we're going to walk through that shadow from the beginning. Before the golden buzzer, before the record deals and the viral videos and the talk show appearances, there was a small girl in a small village doing what she loved most, singing. Courtney Hadwin was born on July 6, 2004, and grew up in Heselden, a quiet former mining village tucked near Hartlepool in County Durham, in the northeast of England. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and ambitions tend to stay local. But Courtney's voice had no interest in staying local. She grew up in a close-knit household with her parents, Paul and Anne-Marie, and her younger siblings. Music wasn't something imposed on her. It was something that grew naturally, the way certain things do in people who are simply born wired for it. She sang at home as a little girl, graduated to musical theater, and then somewhere around the age of 9 or 10, according to her own recollections, she started singing properly. She started to understand that her voice was something different. The first real proof came during a lunchtime open mic at school when an 11-year-old Courtney stood up and sang Say Something by Great Big World and Christina Aguilera. Someone filmed it on their phone. Someone uploaded it to Facebook. And suddenly classmates and community members who had no idea this girl existed were stopping her in the hallway asking, where did that come from? What followed was years of quiet, determined work. She buskied in local spaces to fund singing lessons, attended multiple vocal academies across the region, and began competing in local and regional talent contests. In 2015, she reached the grand final of Teenstar UK. In 2016, she won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award. That same summer, she opened for Sister Sledge at the South Tyneside Festival in front of over 18,000 people. She was 12 years old. Then came The Voice Kids UK in 2017, where she auditioned with a blistering rendition of Tina Turner's Nutbush City Limits, earned herself a spot on Danny Jones's team, and advanced all the way to the final. By the time she was invited to audition for season 13 of America's Got Talent in early 2018, Courtney Hadwin was not a raw unknown. She was a seasoned performer who had been working toward this her entire young life. She just didn't look like it when she walked out on that stage. The audition itself has been watched hundreds of millions of times, and it still doesn't get old. She walked out looking nervous, almost apologetic about taking up space. The judges exchanged the polite, patient expressions they save for acts they haven't yet made up their minds about. And then Otis Redding's hard-to-handle kicked in. Gone was the shy schoolgirl. In her place was something untamed, electric, ferociously alive. Her voice tore through the studio with a grit and power that had no business coming from someone her age. The crowd erupted. Howie Mandel hit the golden buzzer without hesitation, sending gold confetti raining down on a girl who looked genuinely stunned that any of this was happening. And Simon Cowell, who by his own admission almost never shows emotion, turned to the audience with wide eyes and said words that have since been replayed thousands of times. You were this shy little thing when you came out, you sing, and you're like a lion. Within hours, the clip had spread globally. Within days, it had been viewed hundreds of millions of times. She was being called the next Janis Joplin. She was called a generational talent. She advanced through the quarterfinals and semifinals, delivering performances that consistently left judges and audiences speechless, and while she ultimately placed sixth overall, everyone watching understood that the competition result was almost beside the point. A star had been born. Shortly after the live shows ended, Simon Cowell signed her to Psycho Music in partnership with Arista Records. She was 13 years old when she auditioned. She was 14 when she signed her record deal, and she was still very much a child. Nobody tells you what happens after the golden buzzer. Nobody prepares a 14-year-old girl from a small English village for what it actually feels like to be signed to a major label and expected to perform like a seasoned professional. The excitement was real. Courtney has spoken about how she genuinely felt in that initial moment that her dream had come true, and in many ways it had. But dreams, when handed to you by an industry machine before you're old enough to understand the machinery, can quickly begin to feel like something else entirely. Almost overnight, Courtney's world transformed into an unrelenting cycle of studio sessions, label meetings, promotional commitments, and transatlantic travel. She was expected to deliver chart-ready original music on tight deadlines, working alongside professional songwriters and producers who had a very clear idea of what they wanted her to be. The comparisons to Janis Joplin, which had initially felt thrilling, became a framework she was being asked to fit herself into. She was being shaped, styled, and directed toward a polished pop-soul crossover sound that, as she later reflected, didn't feel like her own. She has spoken openly in interviews about what those years actually felt like on the inside. She described sessions where she was surrounded by industry voices steering her toward sounds and themes she didn't fully connect with. She described feeling like a character being directed rather than an artist being developed. She described losing a sense of control over her own path at an age when most teenagers are just beginning to figure out who they even are. And beneath all of it was the sheer physical exhaustion of the schedule. She was crossing continents regularly, spending time away from her family, her home, her friends, the anchors that had always kept her grounded. Her family, to their enormous credit, did everything they could to support her. Her father took on side work, made repeated back-and-forth trips to Los Angeles, and her parents relocated temporarily to be near her during the most intense periods. But no amount of family love can fully insulate a young teenager from the grinding pressure of an industry that moves fast and waits for no one. The mental toll was real and cumulative. Courtney has spoken about burnout, about overwhelm, about the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not just from hard work, but from performing a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit. She was carrying the weight of enormous public expectation while privately struggling to feel like herself. If you were following Courtney's career in the years after her AGT breakthrough, you might have noticed that something gradually went quiet. The social media posts slowed down. The public appearances became less frequent. The music that had been promised seemed to keep receding toward a horizon that never quite arrived. Fans noticed. They asked questions. Speculation filled the gaps that honest communication might have occupied. There were rumors, concern, and the specific kind of frustration that fans feel when someone they genuinely care about seems to have simply vanished. What was actually happening was less dramatic and more human. Courtney was stepping back, not quitting, not disappearing, retreating, reclaiming herself, trying to reconnect with the version of herself that had stood in that schoolyard at 11 years old and sung her heart out for the joy of it, not for a deadline or a demographic or a carefully crafted brand strategy. The relationship with Simon Cowell's Psycho label, while it had launched her into the stratosphere, had not evolved into the nurturing creative partnership she needed. Simon himself was never, by any realistic measure, a personal mentor to Courtney. He was the executive who recognized her talent and signed her. He was, as he has always been, a star spotter who moves quickly and moves on. His job, as he would likely be the first to admit, is to identify talent, not to hold its hand through the emotional complexities of growing up under a spotlight. Courtney has never spoken bitterly or publicly about Simon himself, and there's something admirable about that. She understood, even young, that he was one part of a larger machine. But the machine, ultimately, was not built for her at the stage she was at. And when it became clear that the fit was wrong, she did what the bravest artists do. She walked away. The comeback, when it came, was nothing like the original. There was no golden buzzer, no viral audition, no panel of judges declaring her the next someone else. There was just Courtney, older and clearer-eyed, writing and recording music that sounded unmistakably entirely like herself. Working with Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, known for his work with artists like Etta James and Joe Cocker, she began building a body of work that had no interest in being polished or palatable. Songs like Monsters, You Only Love Me When I Lie, Breakable, and That Girl Don't Live Here arrived with the emotional weight of someone who had been through something real and decided to write about it honestly. No filters, no compromises, just truth. In interviews during this period, Courtney described the shift in terms that made it clear she had done serious inner work to get here. She talked about finally knowing who she is as an artist. She talked about the difference between creating music to satisfy a label's quarterly projections and creating music that actually means something to the person making it. She called this new era a rebirth, not a reinvention, but a return to something authentic that had always been there. Her single You Only Love Me When I Lie was praised widely as her most emotionally resonant work to date, a raw blues soul piece that carried real tension and real courage. Her project, Little Miss Jagged, with its September 2025 release date, was received as her boldest, most personal work yet. A stripped-down, micless performance video left viewers and journalists reaching for words that could do justice to what they were hearing. One description that stuck: she sounded like thunder. She burned like fire. In April 2024, she was handpicked by the legendary Clive Davis to open a gala at Carnegie Hall, where she performed a Janis Joplin tribute in front of an audience of industry legends. The comparison to Joplin, which had once felt like a cage, had become something she could inhabit on her own terms, as a tribute rather than a template. She signed with a new management team, Total Artist Management, under Oliver Mojita, and began booking shows across the UK, Europe, and the United States. She performed at venues like Fiddler Elbow in London and began planning larger tours. She was building something real, one honest step at a time. Today, Courtney Hadwin is 20 years old and living back in County Durham, rooted in the northeast of England that made her. She maintains a genuinely engaged presence across social media, over 1 million followers across TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, not as a promotional machine, but as a person sharing her actual life. Studio snippets, candid thoughts about mental health, the messy, unfiltered reality of being a young artist figuring things out in public without pretending to have all the answers. Her fans describe her content as refreshingly honest. She hosts Instagram Q&A sessions, replies to comments, and has spoken openly about therapy and self-reflection in ways that genuinely help normalize those conversations for younger audiences who follow her. She has said she wants the process of finishing her album to feel real rather than staged, and that she won't sacrifice that feeling for the sake of a release deadline.